Hello and welcome to episode 92 of Toward a Better Life. This is your host, Kevin Pennell. Toward a Better Life podcast features like-minded people sharing their stories, ideas, and activities on what we can do to generate a better life individually and collectively. Feel like contributing? Well, contact me, Kevin, at towardabetterlife.com. If you have a story to tell, a poem to read, or music to share, and by the way, make sure you send me an MP3 for all audio contributions. If you enjoy the episode, if you learned something today, please consider following the show, subscribing through your favorite podcast platform like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon, to name a few. And please be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It's a free way to support our show. And just leave a 5-star review. I won't mind that in the least. It's a chance to tell us what you love about the show and how it helps others to discover it too. Also, please visit my website, towardabetterlife.com. That's towardabetterlife.com for classes, products, my blog, and other ways to create your own better life. You know, there are books, movies, and commentaries about dystopia and dystopian future cultures, but then there's an alternative, Thrutopia. Yep, it's a term that looks at the potentials and means to create more sustainable living and a future that looks much brighter than that of a dystopian future. Manda Scott is sharing some life-changing insights to embrace a Thrutopian life. Born in Scotland, Manda Scott was once a veterinary surgeon and is now a novelist, contemporary shamanic trainer, and host of the international chart-topping Accidental Gods podcast. Best known for the Boudica dreaming series, and by that way, if you're into that sort of genre, by all means, check it out. I've got some of her books, and they are really enthralling. She's been shortlisted, by the way, for the Orange Prize, the Edgar and the Saltire Award, and won the McIlvany Prize. With her wife, Faith, she is co-creator of the Thrutopia Masterclass. Her new novel, Any Human Power, is a Thrutopian political thriller woven through the Boudica-style dreaming, a new mythos for a new reality. Join Manda Scott and I as we explore Thrutopia, a new way of life. Today, I would like to welcome Manda Scott to Toward a Better Life, and we're talking across the pond. It's mid-afternoon over there, and it's early morning here. Hello, Manda. How are you?
Hello, Kevin. I'm very well, thank you. You're right. I just had a very late lunch. It's lovely over here, and it's a real joy and pleasure and honor to be talking to you, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Amanda is got quite a history. We might get into that, but the thing that thrills me the most is recently I heard her on a program that is broadcast live through YouTube. It's called Tea with a Druid with Philip Cargam of Obod, the order of bards, ovates, and druids. And Amanda had a real interesting discussion, and I just wanted to jump through the and just open up my own conversation with you, Manda, about a lovely little thought. And it's something of a new, you said it, trying to do a new genre, I believe, and
yes.
It's Thrutopia. So
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Thrutopia. And by the way, I should tell you, everyone, that she is a New York Times bestseller. So I've already ordered a couple of books through our own library system, and getting some books. She's quite prolific. I'm going to be quiet now. Let you talk.
No, I think you should keep going. Alrighty. So Thrutopia. The term was coined by Professor Rupert Reed way back in 2017. He published a post on Huffington Post. And what he basically said was, we don't need dystopias anymore. They're not useful. I would say, anyone who works with energy knows that where we put our attention is where we get to. And it's not hard to imagine how bad things could be if we let the worst of human nature run rampant. And yet, a lot of my literary contemporaries seem to think that they are going to write the one Thrutopian novel that will change everybody. It'll show how bad it's going to be that everybody will change behavior. And it doesn't work. It never has. It never will. It doesn't just now. It's not how we're hardwired to work. If you don't show somebody an alternative behavior, giving them yet another catastrophic data point of how bad things are is not valuable. It just gets us into that amygdaloid fight, flight, freeze, fill around, whatever we want of the sympathetic and ventral parasympathetic nervous system. We just shut down. And we know from therapy that trauma freezes time. And we don't want to be locked in time. We want to be able to be creative. Utopias, on the other hand, are often lovely and really inspiring and show a world where the best often of human nature comes through. But the problem is they're often on another planet, or they're in a different time frame, or something has happened that got rid of all the bad guys and only the good guys live. And already you've got a tribalism, a dichotomy, a binary of good and bad. And they're not actually any more useful because you can't see how to get there. Thrutopias, and Rupert spelt it THRU, topia, is getting us through from a recognizable present, here, now, towards a future that we would be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. So when I'm doing literary events, the book's not long out and I'm going around the country doing stuff, and I have taken to doing something that I would not have done with the previous books, I think, however shamanic they were, which is to lead people on a guided visualization. And I take them all the way back through the obvious generations, back 7 generations, back 300,000 generations of modern human evolution, back through 5 mass extinctions, the evolution of life on Earth, back to the point where our progenitors were hydrogen molecules boiling in the sun, and then all the way back to the Big Bang. And then get them to step forward again, forward and forward, remembering that at every iteration, something lived long enough to give rise to the next generation. And we are here as a result of that. And then turn around and step another 7 generations down the line to their descendants and be in the presence of the descendants of blood or of spirit. Not all of us have physical descendants, but we all have energetic descendants. We are setting the reality that they will inhabit. And look them in the eye or sense their presence and go, did we make it? Did we do okay? And I do this as a regular practice on my own. I want 7 generations down the line for them to go, yes, absolutely you did. And it may be that you diverted along on the way, you made a lot of mistakes, and you left it a long way too late. But when it really mattered, a critical mass of humanity agreed on a common value set, and we could talk about what that common value set might be, and then put the whole of the creative endeavor of humanity towards envisioning, creating, laying the foundations for a future that every single one of us would be proud that we've left behind. So that's a Thrutopia. I diverge a little bit from Rupert's definition of it. That's my definition. But I wrote the book, so there we go. I'm claiming it. He's fine with me claiming it, and I am indeed trying to get it to be a new genre.
You mentioned something about common value sets. Is that something that you touch on in the books, or is there something you can share with us about that?
Yes, I only really got to grips within myself the concept of Thrutopia and that we need this with the writing of Any Human Power, or with the shamanic visions that led to the writing of Any Human Power. So all of my previous books, I was endeavoring to change the world, but I think I hadn't really got to grips with the fact that the current system is not fit for purpose at all. I was hoping that we would be able to tweak it enough that something would emerge from that. And now I realize we just need a whole new system. That system is not going to work because it's predicated on the wrong value system.
Right.
And I've taken on board really Francis Weller, who's a trauma therapist, has a concept of initiation culture and trauma culture. And partly this is because he was taught by Malidoma Somé, who grew up in Africa, was kidnapped by Jesuits, basically, as far as I can tell, as a sex toy. By the age of 12, he had decided that he never wanted to have sex as an adult because he didn't want to inflict that much pain on anybody, which is, pretty much unacceptable. And he escaped age 16, 17, crossed the whole of Africa pretty well, and got back to his tribe. And they allowed him to undertake the adolescent initiation rites. And he undertook them as someone who had been completely inculcated with what we would now call trauma culture ideology. And he writes very movingly in his book of Water and the Spirit of how that was for him. And eventually he comes through the other side. And it turns out that his name means something like Bridge Between the Worlds. And
Hmm.
he'd been named that in utero before he was ever born by the tribal shaman. And so now he is a bridge between the worlds, from the initiation culture to the trauma culture. So Francis Weller has got all of this in his background, and he's a trauma therapist. And he talks of, so an initiation culture is all of human evolution, 300,000 years of modern human evolution, and all of the indigenous cultures around the world. And the hallmarks of it are that individuals throughout the culture undergo intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death. And the containment is held by the elders, the wise people, the rest of the tribe, and the more than human world. And all three of those are essential. And the individual, they encounter death, they end up pushed to the edges of themselves where existence is in question, such that they have to ask for help from the elders, from the people, and from the more than human world. And if they can ask for it, receive the answers, and act on them, then they emerge through this kind of bottleneck and out the other side as more fully realized human beings. And we look at the adolescent initiation rites, but birth is one of these for both the infant and the mother. Death is another, and in all of these cultures, death is seen as a rite of passage. And any number in between. If you're a hunter, a forager, you might end up a tree falls on you, and you have to ask for help. There's more in that. I would like to come back to that, but let's just say these things happen, and you come back to the people, and you are more connected to the web of life, more aware of your place within a group that is essential. There's none of this ridiculous I exist as an island in and of myself, because nobody does. But at each of these contained encounters with death, the links between parts of ourselves and other people, and ourselves and the more than human world become stronger and more vibrant, and we're able to have a sense of meaning and purpose, being, becoming, belonging, such that we know what is ours to do. We know there's a very famous quote that says, discover the point where your heart's greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And people in initiation cultures know what is theirs to do within that. Our culture is a trauma culture. And we don't have contained encounters with death. We just have trauma, encounters with death that are not contained by elders or a really functioning tribe of people. And absolutely, we have no idea how to ask for help from the more than human world unless we really, really work at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so our traumas just stack and stack and stack and stack until they overflow, and we have an epidemic of mental health crises. And people existing within abusive relationships, and the abusers are likely as traumatized as the abused or were, because trauma begets trauma. Hurt people hurt people. It's a bit of a cliche, but it happens to be true. And within that, I look at the neurophys, because I used to be a veterinary surgeon and I really enjoyed neurophysiology on the way through, and very broadly. And for any neurophysiologist listening, I know this is very clunky. It's like describing physics as kind of atoms like billiard balls, but there's a level at which that works. There are two sets of reward centers in our brain. And one of them is ours in the trauma culture. We tend now to exist on dopamine. And Nate Higgins, in his amazing Great Simplification podcast, says that our culture is now basically designed to take barrels of oil and turn it into microliters of dopamine. And the hallmark of a dopamine hit is exactly that. It's hit. It's brief, it's individual, it's not additive, and it's certainly not cumulative. And it is, in fact, subject to the laws of diminishing returns. So if I have a nose full of cocaine or white sugar or white carbs or coffee or alcohol or music or likes on the internet, or one of the things that is most addictive is my tribe just scored against the other tribe. So maybe in politics, my tribe has not been doing so well and suddenly it's doing better. It's as addictive as a nose full of cocaine.
Wow.
Jonathan Haidt did all the work on that. It's really interesting. There's a book called Righteous Anger, Why Good People End Up Hating Each Other, something like that. I can't remember the exact name, but and this was done way 2014. And so we are buying boxes off Amazon or playing computer games or surfing social media, desperately trying to get these little hits of dopamine that keep us cut off. Serotonin reward centers. Serotonin connection is defined by additive, cumulative, regular, long duration. Dopamine is very short duration. Serotonin is very long duration. People who sing together once a week in community, it's enough, or eat together once a week in community, it's enough to help that sense of community stay alive. And it definitely is cumulative. And it's fostered by pride and respect. If I do know what is mine to do, I have that sense of meaning and purpose, being, belonging, becoming, and I am connected within a group of people who also know what is theirs to do. I am proud of them, I respect them, and I know that they respect me, and I have pride in that respect. And that creates that sense of integration. And particularly if I have the connection to the more than human world, then my head mind is freed up from having to work out what to do. I just moment by moment connect with the greater web of life and ask, what do you want of me? And respond in real time to the answer. When we have cut ourselves off from all of that, which is the hallmark of the trauma culture, we don't have any of that. And so now I'm riffing on my own. This is not Francis Weller anymore, but I've looked back and back and back, and it seems to me that whatever schism happened, whatever cut us off from the possibility of connection to the more than human world, happened before the advent of modern agriculture in the way that we undertake it in the West. So 10 or 12,000 years ago, because we know now that the Americas, the Amazon, Australia, are all managed landscapes, managed by the indigenous people who are there, but they're managed with the land, not imposing ownership on the land such that I tell you what to grow and you grow the amount and I own it all. And any animals on here, I own them. And I can take a wild buffalo and however many generations it takes to turn it into something docile enough that I can harness it up to a plow and beat it along, I will do that. And you can only do that if you believe yourself to be separate.
Mm.
There's a really interesting book called Hospicing Modernity by a woman called Vanessa Andreotti. And she's Brazilian. She's half indigenous, half German. She embodies a lot of internal conflict, but she's worked with it really well. She's now dean, I think, of a university in Canada. And her maternal grandfather, so her indigenous side grandfather, says that the core wounding of colonialism is not the theft of the land and the genocide of the people. These are horrible and deeply traumatic, but these are epiphenomena of the core trauma, which is our culture's, the trauma culture's belief in separability. And it's not even a belief in separation. It's a belief in the ability of separateness to be a thing. And we end up with a language. Our language is 70% nouns and theirs is 70% verbs. Vanessa says in the indigenous languages, it's not possible to speak of separateness. And the whole mindset, they know themselves to be different. They know themselves to be connected.
So what I'm hearing, part of the common value sets includes the idea of working together as opposed to working separate. Yeah.
And connecting to the web of life and asking it, what do you want me to do? And then within that, we have respect, responsibility, reciprocity, all of the things that are hallmarks of indigenous cultures. And for me, I would suggest that a common value set I think we could all align around, wherever we are on the political spectrum or all the other cultural spectra, is integrity, compassion, agency, accountability, and a commitment to the welfare of a living biosphere for as many generations as we can possibly envisage. I think if I ask people, if I do this as an exercise, it's imagine that the world is sorted. We don't know how we got there yet, but we imagine, and you wake up in the morning, how do you feel? And how I feel when I do that is I feel confident and I feel safe. And I feel a level of excitement and magic in the air that I know that whatever it is I'm going to do during the day, I will be part of a greater whole that is working towards this together. I'm not a little individual trying to kind of battle against a tide. I am part of the tide. And I think pretty much everybody wants that. I don't know a single person who thinks the current system is working. Where we
Mm-hmm.
end up clawing each other's eyes out is arguing over how to fix it. And I think those arguments are dead.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has there is no quick fix answer. There is no solution. This is an emergent process, but the emergence comes out of the values that underpin it. And until we can agree on a common set of values, then we're going to end up clawing each other's eyes out, which is not useful at this stage in the game.
The first thing that I would think about is I'm trying to write this other, see if I can do a brain split here. But I suppose one of the things that comes to mind is, okay, so Amanda, this is phenomenal thought, but where do we start? That would be a good place.
It always starts inside. You heard me on Philip Carr-Gomm and Tea
Mm-hmm.
with the Druid, and a lot of spiritual work, every bit of spiritual work starts with inner work. It starts with I am doing internal family systems therapy now, which I think that's a terrible name, but it's revolutionary. I've been doing therapy for 40 years, and this is like, oh, this is so exciting. It's very shamanic. And it's really helping me to understand the bits, the inner parts that are committed, it seems, to being very judgmental or very destructive. And they're all doing it because they feel they have to, because they have to protect other parts that were wounded very early on, or perhaps are inherited wounding. I don't really need to go down that rabbit hole. I just need to
Mm-hmm.
understand that these parts are doing their best to keep me safe.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can help them to understand that the world is different now, and they don't need to be in this frozen place where we said earlier, trauma freezes time, to unfreeze them, allow them to then integrate, bring their extraordinary strength and passion and creativity into my system, then my system becomes more whole. And the more whole I am, the more able I am to connect with the web of life.
Yeah.
And the more I can be that in the world, the easier it is for people around me. And I run a membership, Accidental Gods, trying to teach people how to do this. And then the deeper one with the Dreaming Awake, also trying to teach people how to do this. Because I think there is a critical mass. Again, if enough people really do the inner work, it's going to be much, much, much easier for everybody else. So I would say the first step is the inner work, but not everybody, probably everybody listening to your podcast gets inner work. Not everybody wants to. And so I think there are also avenues. Joanna Macy, who is obviously utterly amazing, talks about the 3 pillars of the great turning. There's holding actions, systemic change, and shifting consciousness. And we just discussed the shifting consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that we are on the brink of conscious evolution, which is the evolution of our consciousness consciously chosen, so that we can change our epigenetics in the moment. However, there are people for whom inner work is too scary, or they just don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right.
certainly in our culture. And for them, then perhaps they're doing holding actions, which is just let's stop things getting significantly worse. So over here we have XR, gluing themselves to the front of a bank, or sitting in the road and trying to stop more fossil fuel exploration. In your part of the country, it might be electing the person who isn't an actual psychopath into the White House. That's a holding action. It's not systemic change. And then there's the third pole, is systems change, is working out how do we peacefully, I'm absolutely certain that we're going to emerge into a new system. Being peaceful is part of that conscious evolution. Our old idea within the trauma culture of who has the most toys wins
Mm-hmm.
is not a useful idea. And that's the concept from which might is right arises. So working out what the systemic change looks like is the third part of the 3 pillars. And so any human power goes through quite a lot of each of those, actually. But definitely the systems change is how do we actually progress from where we are to where we need to be?
So do you address those 3 pillars in your books?
Yes, I think I mentioned it in passing, but I'm not, this is fiction and it's a thriller. So I don't
Oh,
sit
no,
down and go, okay, guys, 3 pillars. But yes, they are all
no.
in there.
Well, that's the whole thing. So James Redfield wrote a book some years ago, back in 1993. It was called The Celestine Prophecy.
Oh, yes. I
Yeah.
didn't remember the author. Right. Yes,
Yeah. So the
I do
Celestine
know of that.
Prophecy, of course, is, talking about going after the various elements to create a better life, basically. And he said on an interview with a night show host, and I honestly am not sure. It may have been Johnny Carson. Boy, that dates it, doesn't it?
Sure
But
does.
he said in that interview, he says, "Well, a lot of this information, as near as I can tell, is factual. But
Right.
if I put it out as a nonfiction, it will not sell.
Nobody would read it. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
nobody would read it.
Yeah.
But if I make it fictionalized and really cool, people are going to soak it up. And they
Yep.
say, wow, this thing is awesome. This thing is great. Now, look at the little truths that are underlying all of that stuff, all of that novel. And it's amazing. And it kind of goes back to some of the bards over the years, over the centuries. And what did bards do? Bards
Tell
taught.
stories.
Yeah,
Yes.
taught through
Yes.
stories, all the
Yes.
verbal information that is brought about. And some of that stuff is still verbal only. And I talked with someone just yesterday about some old healing techniques that were in the Appalachians here in the United States. And some of those wonderful cures are still verbal only. It's
Right.
not written down anywhere.
Right. Right. Because
And
when
guess
you
how
write it
effective?
down, you freeze it
Hmm.
again. And it's actually it's not. They're designed to be alive.
Yeah.
And narrative is alive and written things are locked in time. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's think about what started all that part is just the sense of having those three pillars, and they're put forth in your books. And I
Sure.
should say book or books. So is there one
And
that?
well, any human power is the one that is a Thrutopian. Yeah, it's we're calling it mytho-political because it has mythical aspects to it, but it's also a highly political thriller.
And
And it does
that
have all
is your
those
most
three.
recent
That's the
one.
most recent. Yeah, it came out this year. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The Boudica books have a lot of the spiritual work in them, and they look back at our shamanic past, which was druidic, but I call them dreamers because druid's a very charged word in this country. But those were designed to show us who we were before the Romans came, who we were
mhm,
before the trauma was brought to our nation. Although at the time I wrote them 20 years ago, I hadn't got the concept of trauma culture and initiation culture. But I had a sense that if people understood who we were, they would know who we could be if we could let go of the Romanization of our culture.
mhm. And I, I smile when you mentioned about 20 years ago and you really didn't know what you know now. But did you ever stop to think at some level, Manda, the universe and your higher self knew?
Oh, well, also my guides knew for sure, because
Absolutely.
everywhere along the way I get pushed to do something, and I learned very early on, it's not my job to ask why.
Yep.
It's just my job to get on and do it and trust that why will become apparent in due course, and it always
Yeah.
does. So yeah,
And it goes about letting the universe, I've often said, let the universe handle the details because I
yeah,
don't know what they are.
totally.
And
Yeah,
uh,
yes, and it's a great relief to our head minds to not have to know. Our
yeah,
culture tells us we have to be able to plan everything, we have to be able to predict everything, we have to have absolute
yeah,
certainty, and going, no, I don't know, and
no,
I don't need to know.
yeah,
It's great.
yeah. And so go with that. Go with your feeling that's within. I don't know why. A great example is I've got a couple of books here. The one I told you about beforehand was Ross Nichols' book on Druidry, and then I've got one that I'm showing you now. It's called The
Oh
Druids,
yes.
and I showed this to a guest that I'm going to have on the not too distant future. Actually, it will have been when this one's on. But he said Ross Nichols' book on that is very hard to come by. And the funny thing is, Manda, I really started moving a lot more toward Druid thought just in the past several months, but I can trace it back all the way back, believe it or not, to my teenage years now. And it just came to a fruition now and saying, okay, now you're ready for this. And that included shamanic stuff.
Right.
I got shamanic training 20 years ago, and
Right.
it's viable, it's real. It really helped me to see me. But here's the funny thing is those books that I bought those books over 15 years ago.
Whoa, and you're only just reading them now?
Yeah, because I
Right.
wasn't
So they
ready
just
then.
became necessary now. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
because the universe is saying you might get this now, but you're probably not. So just put them on your bookshelf, and that's where I have
Right.
them. I have a special little bookshelf above in the bedstead,
Right. Of
and
books that I will get to when I'm nudged to go and get them.
yeah,
Fantastic.
it's
Hey.
crazy. But and I said, oh my gosh, look, oh my gosh, look, and actually, I didn't get the druids that I just showed you. Um, my wife did when she was over in England, and she found it
Oh,
at a
interesting.
used bookstore in Somerset.
Wow. Wow, right. And
And that was
Somerset,
over that.
Glastonbury is a
Yeah.
big center of
Oh,
this kind of thing
absolutely.
in the UK.
Yeah. And
Fantastic.
that was over 10 years ago.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you know, when you're ready, the teaching will be there. That's you
Yes.
just have to open to it and be ready to listen to the nudges. And it sounds to me like you're really able to listen to the nudges.
Well, it's not, and Mando, I want to be able to convey to people that listen to this, it's not something magical. It's not something that's
No, no.
pie in the sky. It's
Yes.
not something that, oh, well, they've got that ability or blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Every
Yes.
one of us has that ability. Every
Totally.
one of us.
Totally. Yes.
And the biggest part that I can share is some wisdom that was given to me decades ago, and that is two words. Those two words are walk aware.
Right. Right.
Just
I thought
walk
you were
with
going to
us.
say Ram Dass would be here now, but that's actually three. Yes. So walk aware is even more succinct. Yeah.
Yeah. So just be aware of everything around you. If so why did I get those books? I can't tell you why, other than the fact that I felt I needed them. Not that I wanted them, I needed them.
Yes. Yes. Big
That's an,
distinction. Thank you.
yeah,
Yes.
big
Yes.
distinction. I
Yes.
want, I want hair,
You don't need it because you can have a hat.
but I need
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. We teach the students, the shamanic students, a lot. You can ask for what you want, but what you get is what you need.
There was a
And
song
yeah.
about that.
Oh, is it? I don't listen to music, so hey.
Rolling
Um,
Stones back in the 60s.
really?
Oh yeah.
Cool. There we
Uh,
go. Nothing is new.
I'm not going to try and do the lyrics right now because I'll mess them up, but everyone that knows it knows it. So we'll let it go at that. I really want to have you tell us a little bit more about your latest book, if you could. And let's talk about that a little bit. I'm going to see if, when we look at some of the details that are associated with it, I'm seeing information like visions of a life beyond death. The future is already here. Ways to a future we'd be proud to leave behind, and each one of those is phenomenal in and of itself. May I read, Mando, what is written at the first part of your website?
Sure. Yeah, and
Okay.
my wife makes the websites. I cannot remember what's there, but please do. Go ahead, read it.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is on any human power that's found on Manda's website, and it's mandascott.co.uk. So this is what you'd find. Dream deeply, rise up strong, change is coming. The visionary new thriller from the Sunday Times best-selling author Manda Scott. How do you help the people you love create a future you're proud to leave behind? From acclaimed author Manda Scott comes the seismic thriller of a lifetime. As Land lies dying, she makes a promise that binds her long into the beyond. A decade later, her teenage granddaughter is caught up in an international storm of outrage that unleashes the rage of a whole failed generation. For one shining fragment of time, the world is with her. But then the backlash begins, and soon she and her family are besieged by the press, facing all the powerful wrath of the old establishment, whose only understanding is power over, not power with. I could keep going, but I'm gonna stop there and just wow, you've got my attention.
Yay. Oh, well done. Thank you. Okay, so this book arose out of a series of visions. That's the first thing to say, because you will get that. I thought I'd stopped writing. I did the master's in regenerative economics at Schumacher. I came home. We moved across the hill to a very tumble down small holding, and I started the podcast. And I thought that it's much more immediate. You know, if you wanted, this could be live, you and I talking. It's that immediate. And even if it goes out in a couple of months, it's not going to be obsolete by then. Writing
Mm.
a book is a very slow, long-term process. And I thought, we're in the singularity. We haven't got time. June 21st, so the summer solstice 2021, I was drumming for a group of students online because we had to do everything online at that point because pandemic. And I, instead of being completely focused on the students in the room, as I should have been and usually am, I had a series of instructions that came through in clear text, which is not usual. 3 times in my life that before there have been absolute clear texts, and this was one of them. So I did what I was told, which in the end got me sitting up the hill in a particular, I live on the side of a hill, looking down the valley in a particular frame of mind for at least an hour as the sun goes down every day until further notice. That was the instruction. There was a bunch of other stuff, but it's too busy to bother with just now. And by the end of the week, I had the first scene of the book and 3 elements thereafter, and the understanding that we needed this Thrutopian set of visions. How could I be raging about the fact that we're not bringing together all the stuff I was hearing about in the podcast? What I understood from the masters and the podcast was really the depth and breadth of the meta crisis and its many, many, many layers. And I understood a lot more about complexity theory and emergence. And I also really got to grips with the fact that we have a lot of the solution set. We're just not implementing it all. But what came to me in the visions up the hill was, and why would we be implementing it all? Because nobody is stitching this all together in a story that makes sense. Exactly as you said, I could do all the fact-based, let this person come and tell their story podcasts that I like. But until you create the overarching narrative, people don't spend every week listening in the way that I do. And they don't stitch all the points together because it's my job. Like, why would anybody else do that? So the scene that I had is Alana Penhaligon is 60-something years old. She's lying in a bed. Her 15-year-old grandson, Finn, is sitting at her side, and he says, when you come home, can we go up the hill and watch the crows go to bed, which is partly what I'd been doing. And she says, no, I'm not coming home. You know this. I am dying. There is no coming home from here. We have had this conversation. And in the course of the ensuing conversation, he says, I don't want to be part of a world with you not in it. He's living with her. He was living with her and her partner, Kate, who's recently died. So he's been living with her. His mother's up in Glasgow. And Lan realizes he's serious. And she says, I don't really know what's coming next, in spite of the fact that she's been an anthropologist. She spent 40 years exploring death and dying and in indigenous cultures. But anyway, I don't really know what's happening next. But if you really need me and you call, I will do whatever it takes to come to you. I promise. And she and he and we all feel the gods pause in their labors and look down and go, okay, that is a promise and you are held to that. And then she dies. And the whole of the rest of the book is told from her perspective of having to fulfill this promise.
Wow.
So she's locked in the between, which for me is is a place I can map out very easily between the lands of life and the lands of death, a liminal place. And she has the crow as her guide. And the other thing that I saw was she enters into the void 3 times. And again, the void is a conceptual place in shamanic teaching. And Lan is very afraid of the void because the only person she knows who's gone there is an indigenous shaman who's much, 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 much better trained than she is, because nobody in our culture can be a shaman. We can be shamanic practitioners, but we're not going to be a shaman. And this person stepped into the void and was lost. And the crow tells her, this isn't like death. This isn't a rite of passage where you just move into another reality. This is total annihilation if you don't get it right. So don't screw up, because you, Lan, and me, the crow, will both get gone. So she's quite nervous, but she goes in 3 times. And the point of the void is it's outside time and space. It's a place with nothing. But if you can anchor there and really hone your intent, you can split time so that you can see timelines of what may happen. And so she sees various of the ways where Finn does manage to kill himself. But the implication of you're there is that if you can take agency, it may be that you can create a timeline that doesn't exist yet, that you can't have seen because you haven't made it happen. So she's kicked back into consensus reality, the lands of life, and the crow's saying, okay, you don't want him to die, see what you can do. And then twice more, she goes into the void, and once is for this insurgent movement that you spoke of that's building around her granddaughter, who is conceived on the night of her funeral. So I've got the widest possible intergenerational spread that I could have, from someone who's actually dead to somebody who wasn't conceived until after she died. And her granddaughter posts a tweet, which is a replica of an actual tweet that a young woman posted. And the storm of outrage arises. And so at that point, she goes into the void to look at the futures of the family and the movement that is arising around them. And then a 3rd time, she goes into the void to look at the whole of humanity. We're all locked in a bus barreling towards the edge of a cliff, and the old white blokes have got their hands on the wheel and are not letting go. She sees all the ways we could go over the cliff and crash and burn. But again, the implication is if she can take agency, and by now we're 15 years later on, if she can take agency, she may be able to turn the bus from the edge of the cliff, which is what I still believe is possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bus and the cliff are a metaphor that I use a lot. So that's the mythic part of the Thrutopia. I really want people to be less afraid of death. I mean, I wrote it because that's what I was given to write. But looking back, a lot of our climate denialism is linked very strongly to our culture's terror and denial of death.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of studies, mostly done in the States, where you get someone to fill in a political questionnaire and they're fairly progressive, left, democratic, whatever we call it. And a week later, you get them to do the same thing, but you put them in front of a funeral parlor or a funeral procession goes past or they're near a cemetery. Something that's a subliminal reminder of their own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And they shift 20 points to the right.
Mm.
And they don't even know that they've done it. So it's very subliminal.
So is it a fear of the death?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
fear of our culture doesn't give us the strategies to
Mm-mm.
understand that death is a rite of passage
Right.
at all.
I
So
have
we're
a
in denial.
I have a good friend that was on the podcast a while back, and she talked about being a hospice nurse.
Mm,
And it's really interesting that in the course of that podcast, we discussed people's resistance to using the word death or dead or
right,
dying.
yes. Stephen
They'd much
Jenkinson talks
rather,
about that a lot in his Die Wise book. Yeah.
yeah,
They'll use any other
and
euphemism, but not actual death.
yeah,
Yep.
crossing over,
Yeah,
uh,
passing. Yes.
passing
Yes.
on,
Yeah.
transitioning, all
Yeah.
that, because she says, I'm not trying to be ugly or not trying to be problematic with this, but death is death. You're dead.
You did.
But we perceive it as something entirely different.
Mm.
We see it as something that's it. That's the end. There is no more. I had a client yesterday who talked about it, and I've learned a long time ago, Manda, that I call it, unless they open the door, I'm not going to go
You
there.
can't push through. No.
Mm-mm.
No.
So I just let her
It has
talk
to
about
come.
it, and she didn't ask me, "What do you think about that?" If she had, now you opened
Right.
the door. So anyway,
Yes. Yes.
um, she said that we have only one life, and I'm thinking, oh, if you
There's
only
so
knew.
much evidence that that is not the case. It's our Western trauma culture tells us that, and honestly, even I'm guessing your friend, the hospice nurse, is well aware. People who've had really quite deep conversations with whoever came to collect them.
Yeah,
And Ram Dass
yeah.
spoke to someone who'd already moved on, and they said, "What's death like?" And he said, "It's like taking off a too tight shoe."
Well, there are a lot of illustrations out there that it's not as bad as what some people would think.
It isn't. There's
Um,
so much evidence now of near-death experiences and of people who've been connected with someone who has recently died in ways that are verifiable and in multiple witnesses. It's yeah, it's daft actually. And Rupert Sheldrake says this. He's the guy who's pretty much the only TED talk that's ever been taken down.
oh, really?
But he does, yeah, he's amazing. He's a um biologist from Cambridge. He's quite old now, but he does a lot of this work. He did all the work on dogs who know when their owners are coming home and various other things. And he says he goes to scientific conferences because they basically want to laugh at him. And all these hardcore scientists sit there with their arms crossed and all the body language and shaking their heads and going, no, no, this is nonsense. He says, you go to dinner afterwards, 2 glasses of wine in, there's a line 6 times around the table of people desperate to tell him of their own personal experiences of exactly why he's right. We all know this.
Hmm.
It's just that our culture somehow has decided that we need to deny it, and it's
Yep.
not useful. What we need to do is learn to ground and connect in a way that's authentic and real, because there's also the people who are busy projecting stuff that frankly is nonsense
Right.
because they feel the need to make it up. And when you're not making it up, when it's, as you said earlier, anyone can connect, but
Hmm.
there's a sense when it's real and you have to stop
Yes.
panicking and your head has to get out of the way and not just feed you stuff that kind of slightly does it. You've got to have done enough, whatever we call the being aware, living, walking aware, was it? You have
Yeah.
to have done enough of that for your head to just relax enough to let your heart mind understand what's going on.
Michael Harner, in his book, The Way of the Shaman, talked about something that was very, very, very important. And I took it to heart in that I think it's within the first chapter or so. he talked about the basis of journeying. And he says, if you've not done a journey before, my strong recommendation is you have somebody with you or near you that when you do this journey on your own, that when something happens, they'll be there to help you.
Right.
Because, my brain would go toward some of the stuff that I've seen in journeying that would scare the living bejesus out of you until you recognize that they are there to help you
Yeah.
and that, if it is something that's contrary, then basically you have respect for it, but you tell it to, you just stay over there. I have no business with you and just move on. That's easier said than done sometimes. But that's where my brain went. But I think sometimes too, going on the journey on my own, one of the things that can happen is I can find out something about Kevin I didn't know before. Maybe I don't want to see it. And that would be
Yes.
the other piece to say, that's why I don't want to do this anymore. This is why I'm
Yeah.
afraid of it, is to have somebody nearby when you're doing this work, because it can be, I don't want to use the word frightening. What's a good word, Manda,
No, no,
instead
I
of
think
frightening?
I'm very fanatically obsessed with safety with my students because I have seen people crash and burn very badly. And our training takes a minimum of 10 years, and actually nobody's done it in less than 16
Yeah.
because there are places you don't want to go and things you do not want to meet until or unless you have the guidance of something that you would actually trust with your sanity and your life. And that you've got to get past the projection. Projection is a thing early on.
So,
Our culture leads people to be inclined to think that they have to fill in the gaps, and you have to get past that.
yeah.
And I think people are dead because they didn't listen to the basic safety rules. So it is quite scary. I think this is one of the things I think about shamanic practice. It's either the oldest and most powerful spiritual path on the planet, or you can learn it in a weekend, and it cannot be both.
That's true.
And in all of the indigenous cultures, Herodotus writing about the Druids on Mona, it was 10 to 20 years, 12 to 20 years of training. I was offered a training with an indigenous Huichol shaman, and it was going to be at least 12 years. And if you were still alive at the end of it, then you've passed, but the pass rate is not very high.
Oh,
And people would die rather than become the tribal shaman, or they would die in the process of becoming the tribal shaman. And if you're not afraid of death, if that is a rite of passage, it doesn't matter. If you're someone who still clings on to the idea that death is scary, then it does, and you don't want to
hmm.
go there. And so I think it's there are a lot of things in the non-ordinary realities, and some of them really don't like people, and you need to know how not to encounter those because some of them are very,
Yeah.
very, very big. And
Yeah.
until you have a guide that you can lean back on, or a guide even that says, "You see that direction over there? You just don't want to go there." And you
Yeah.
go, "Right, I'm turning around." Not, "Oh, I wonder, I think I could go and look there." And your guys go, "No, really don't." You just got to not do that. And it takes a long time for people inculcated, I think, with Western value sets of I know best and I can make my own reality to realize that we're not making our own reality. We can shape our own heart space. We can choose to be in gratitude, compassion, joyful curiosity, and to live from those, or we can live in despair and despite and despondency and rage and all of those things. And that's a moment by moment choice. And we are feeding the stuff that feeds on fear, or we are feeding whatever it is that helps us to experience joy and gratitude. That's a choice. How things are in the other realities, we don't get to pick that, I think. Does that make sense?
It does.
We veered way off what the book is about.
Well, again, we talked about this ahead of time and we said, well, just let it go where it's going to go and we'll go from there. And the
We can always come back, have another
yes, we
bite.
can.
Yes.
Yeah. Have another biscuit, we'll go from there.
Yep.
Biscuits
Yep.
are done. I have my tea.
Yes, I've been drinking tea all the way through. I have
It's just,
motherwort. It's
yeah, it's
gorgeous.
just, oh yeah, it's just the opposite for me. So anyway, uh, lemon ginger for me sometimes. So anyway, would we still be on track with Thrutopia in bringing in some basic understandings of shamanism? Just answer that part first. Do you think
Yes.
we could? Okay. So with that in mind, thank you so much. This is lovely. I'm having a blast. I hope you are.
Yeah, really.
And listeners, I
Yes.
hope you are. This is wonderful. So one of the things that I ran into, short version is, so why did I decide to take a course on shamanism? And yes, it was a weekend course. but the way that it was set up to me was the way that I think it should have been set up. And unless Michael Harner is stopped, I think his introductional program is like 5 years minimum.
I think he's dead now, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that said, the man that I talked with, and everyone that's listening, I can tell you this, that this works. He actually interviewed me before he would allow me to register.
Very good. Right.
And to
So then you
see,
weed out the people who are
just in
in
it
it
for the
for the
fun of it.
kicks. Yeah.
Exactly. Because this stuff is serious. This stuff is mind expanding. And one of the questions he asked me, Mando, was, why do you want to do this? And
Really
that's
good
one of the,
question.
yeah, and that's one of the questions I would even ask people when they would come to me about doing some kind of a journey thing with them, or me doing some spiritual ceremony for them. And I would ask them, why do you want to do it? And if I understand them to say, well, I'm just doing it because I want to. Well, when you figure out, with all due respect, when you figure out why you really want to do it, then come see me. But right now, no is the answer, with all due respect.
Oh, yeah, really good. Yeah.
So he asked me, he says, why do you want to do this? And I said, well, honestly, the reason I want to do this is because I want to make sure that the things I'm doing and the feelings that I have are not a result of me losing my mind.
Right.
Because
Oh, that's an interesting one.
I had been experiencing various um I had had various experiences that would have been more shamanic than not, and I had been doing it for a few years. And like, for an example, when I do some, where I call myself a healing facilitator because the person does the healing, I don't.
Right.
And you
Right. Well
put them
done.
into that
Yeah.
space, and I would follow the guides, the helpers, the spirits, whatever term you want to use, and I would follow their guides because they're the ones I'm in communication with when I'm doing this work, and find out what works for you.
Sure.
And then we move on and find out, how to take care of them. And I said, this is
Good.
stuff I've been doing for years. And then the other part is where I've had apparitions. Oh gosh,
Right.
he's off the ball. He's really lost it now. But I'd seen spirits,
Right.
and it was phenomenal. And that's in real time. That's not in visions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and yet, I said, I just want to make sure I'm not crazy. And there was just a moment of silence, and he says, you're fine.
Yes, exactly. Yes, you don't need to do any
And at
training,
that point, I
but you
wiped
need
my
to
brow and I
expand
said, I'm
your
good.
concept.
Yeah,
Yes, because our culture doesn't, if you had gone to a Western medical doctor, they might well have signed you into some kind of facility at that
oh,
point.
yeah, absolutely.
And one of my very early teachers was a Danish individual who'd worked a lot with the Sami and who then also worked a lot with schizophrenic people, who told me that the difference between us and them, us, we the shamanic practitioners, and then the schizophrenic people, is that we choose when to go and we know how to get back.
Right.
Um, but I firmly believe that if a lot of the schizophrenic people had been given training and they'd existed within a culture where your capacity to move between realities was a good thing and not an evidence of some kind of mental imbalance, then they would be flourishing.
Hmm.
So we have again a very, very limited view of what is sane and safe, and so I'm imagining that your concept of what's crazy has changed rather than your behavior or your experiences.
Hmm. So is this something that you approach within your website that you're working on when you do this sort of thing? Like, I'm talking about Dreaming Awake Shamanic Practice.
Yeah.
And then also the podcast and membership program. So the membership program, do you touch on uh, shamanic practices and so forth there too, or is it over at the
Mm,
other end?
well, they all come from me, so there's a lot of overlap. There's a kind of a Venn
Sure.
diagram with all three. The Dreaming Awake is actually mostly the early years are taught by my senior apprentice now, because I got to the point where I realized I needed to start handing over and I needed to be training her up. So she teaches the first 5 years. And she does some online for people in other time zones, because we do not want people getting in a plane and flying over to here.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a very long term. It's the beginning is 5 years, and then beyond that is by invitation, because we have to believe that you're safe. But that's, yeah, as I said before, it's a minimum of 10 years, but actually nobody's done it in less than 16, just because life gets in the way. And then Accidental Gods was, I had sat with the fire December 2018, solstice 2018, and I had a bunch of instructions, and part of it, when I interpreted what it was that I needed to start teaching at scale. Because the thing about the Dreaming Awake is it's 12, maybe 15 people in the room because we have to do a lot of individual work. How do you teach this at scale safely? And so Accidental Gods is my answer to that. And really, it's expanded to be me understanding that conscious evolution needs to happen. And how do I help ordinary people? I have as a baseline my concept of a single mother with 2 kids under the age of 10 who lives in a tower block somewhere in the middle of the city. How do I help somebody like that to connect to the web of life in a way that feels real and is authentic? And so how do I share work that isn't as dangerous as the shamanic work? Because I know we don't want to create it to be something fearful, but
Right.
you have to understand that there are safety boundaries and you have to work within them. And it's not that we're being authoritarian and making up random rules. I'm just observing what's safe and what isn't.
Right.
And our culture is not very good at that. The indigenous cultures, honestly, the kids grow up knowing where the boundaries are. And our culture isn't like that. And a
Right.
lot of people think that they've done they've done a couple of years and then they know they can break all the rules, which my
No.
experience is that this is not the case. And so, but the accidental God stuff, it heads into the same area. I'm really wanting people, in the end, I want as many people as possible to be able to connect authentically in a grounded way with the web of life such that they can ask it, what do you want me to do? And after that, you answer it. And then the rest of your life flows with that. And if that means using shamanic guides as a kind of interlocutor between you and the web of life, that's great. If you can ask direct, that's also great. And they're just different ways in and different focus. And now we ask the Dreaming Awake students to have done quite a lot of the accidental God's work because we discovered that the ones who had were getting a lot more out of our one-to-one teaching. So it's all heading in the same direction. But the accidental gods you can do in your own time. There's something like 483 different meditations and things up there now. It's been up a while. And you put your earphones in, you press play on the first day and you do that. And when you've done that bit, you press play on the next bit and you can do it at your own time and you can do it anywhere in the world. Whereas the Dreaming Awake is sit in circle with us.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So the first one, the podcast and the Accidental Gods podcast and the membership program, I'm hearing would be a good place to begin if you
Yes,
really want to
totally.
start with this. And I'm also hearing that if you want to learn more about how to become part of that Thrutopia process, is start there too. Is that a pretty
Yeah,
good
for sure.
estimation? Yeah.
Yes, we also have a Thrutopian Writers Association. If you just want to write stuff and you don't want to do the
Well,
spiritual work,
it's kind of the way it is.
then that kind of grew out of the Thrutopian Masterclass, which I may be going to run again next year. I don't know yet. But so there's because there's a lot of political. We haven't really got to the political stage of the book, but there's a lot of the systems change of how do we change business? How do we change our mode of governance? How do we change the way politics works? How do we change our economy? How do we change the way we source our food and the way we work with water and the way we engage? These are all systems change things that you can do without needing to do the very hard work, frankly. It takes time. The biggest obstacle we find with people in accidental gods is they say we just don't have time. I'm thinking you don't have 20 minutes a day to
Right.
sit and do that and then everything that ripples from that and they think they don't. So the systems change is there for the people for whom the inner work is just not an option. And
Yeah.
you can still be doing that. You can still be thinking, you can still be exploring any or all of these fields and fitting them together in ways that will take us to where we need to go. So that's also a route in.
Yeah. I could go on. I know
But we've
we
probably run
both.
out of time, haven't we, Kevin?
Yeah. Yes, we have. And if I can say that we're going to do this again, and we've already talked about that, and we're both saying so. Thank you,
Yes,
thank you,
thank you,
thank you.
thank you, thank you. Yes, I'd be
Um,
delighted. It's a really generative conversation. Thank you.
because the thing that I want to do, and I'm going to throw a preview of coming attractions, and I'll try to write it down so I remember it next time. But I would like to maybe
Ingenuity.
explore into taking away the fears, maybe the misunderstandings, misconceptions of shamanism and shamanic work, because some of that would, I think that would be helpful to many people. And also
Yep.
to understand what it means to say I'm a shamanic practitioner. I had a very good friend of mine that said one day that I said, a lot of people call you a medicine person. I've even had some people call you a shaman. Why don't you call yourself that? And he says the reason is that's ego driven.
Yeah, I
For
think you can use
me,
the tools of shamanic practice, but people in our culture are not.
yeah,
When you've met shamans and indigenous cultures, it's a really different thing.
yeah, it is. It is. And even to call yourself a medicine person, it's just I'm just a person, and I try to help and I try to teach, and we'll go from
Yeah,
there. So
yeah,
I
totally.
know we're going to go
Grand.
on. So
Fantastic. And see
one,
also what your listeners want. If you get feedback, then we'll
yeah,
go roll with what's there. So, guys, if you have ideas, and I'm using guys as all genders,
sure.
please let us know what would be useful, and we'll come back and have another chat. That's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be grand. So one more time, I'll let you say it this time. How do people get in touch with Manda Scott?
So there are two broad ways. There's two websites. One is Manda Scott, all one word, .co.uk, and the other is Accidental Gods, all one word, .life.
Okay.
So the membership is up there on Accidental Gods. If that's what you're interested in, head for there for sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
and the dreamingawake.co.uk. But as Kevin said, I'd go for Accidental Gods first and then explore Dreaming Awake.
yeah. And you're going to have a new listener on Accidental Gods. I can tell you that now.
Thank you. Yay. I'm talking to Judith Schwartz later today, who's from not too far away from you, and she's amazing. So yeah, it'd be fun.
Oh, that's not fair. To throw that out there. Anyway, Amanda, this has been delightful. This has been wonderful. We look forward to our next time together.
Totally.
And enjoy a beautiful day, Manda Scott. And thanks for being on Toward a Better Life.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a delight. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Manda, for sharing Thrutopia and how to get there. You may connect with Manda on the web at mandascott.co.uk, accidentalgods.life, and dreamingawake.co.uk. These links are in the show notes, by the way. And don't forget to send in your requests, like we talked about, on what you'd like to hear us discuss when Manda and I talk again. If you're seeking insights and advice on how to create a better life for yourself, please visit my website, towardabetterlife.com. It's continuing to grow with new blog entries, ways to enhance your spiritual journey, and a few products to assist you on that journey, including the opportunity to buy my book, Two Feathers Spiritual Seed Planter. I also offer Toward a Better Life virtual and in-person sessions and classes. Send your inquiries to me, Kevin, at towardabetterlife.com for the details. Jeremy Hazelwood joins me next week on Toward a Better Life. Jeremy's profound insights and strategies have helped countless individuals to unlock their full potential and align their life with their true purpose. That's next week. If you enjoyed the episode or learned something today, please consider following and subscribing to Toward a Better Life through your favorite podcast platform like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, whichever you choose. And be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast if you would. That's pretty important because it helps the podcast more than I can say, and it allows me to reach out to more and more people, which would mean the world to me. If you have any questions or if you'd like to share some music, a story, prose, if it's audio, by the way, please send it in an MP3 file. Or if you want to be my guest, any way to do that stuff, just write me, Kevin at towardabetterlife.com. That's Kevin at towardabetterlife.com. Until next time, enjoy your journey toward a better life.